Jean Martinez never imagined that her ability to organize filing cabinets would one day determine whether millions of people lived or died. For 3 years, she'd been dismissed as just another administrative clerk at NORAD's Cheyenne mountain complex, buried deep beneath Colorado's granite peaks. Her colleagues saw her as the quiet girl who processed paperwork, filed reports, and made sure coffee supplies never ran out. They had no idea that behind her wire-rimmed glasses and neatly pressed uniform lay the mind of someone who had once been destined for nuclear engineering. Someone whose mathematical precision and crisis management skills would soon become the only thing standing between America and catastrophic failure. This is the story of how the most overlooked person in the most secure facility in North America became the most important. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The elevator descended 2,000 feet into the heart of Cheyenne Mountain, carrying Jean Martinez to her morning shift at the North American Aerospace Defense Command. The familiar hum of the ventilation system and the soft electronic beeps of security checkpoints had become the soundtrack to her daily routine. As the massive blast doors sealed shut behind her, Sarah adjusted her security badge and headed toward the administrative wing, a place most military personnel considered the least important section of the most important facility in North America. Jean's workstation sat in a sterile office lined with filing cabinets containing decades of classified documents. Her computer screen displayed endless spreadsheets, tracking everything from inventory reports to personnel schedules. To the casual observer, her job appeared mundane. Process forms, update databases, ensure that the proper paperwork reached the proper desks at the proper times. It was exactly the kind of work that career military officers delegated to junior personnel while they focused on what they considered real defense matters. "Morning paper, Princess," called out Lieutenant David Chen as he passed her desk, carrying a stack of operational reports. The nickname had stuck after Jean had spent her first month reorganizing the entire filing system, creating a color-coded organizational structure that made document retrieval 300% more efficient. What was meant as gentle mockery had become accepted terminology among the staff. Jean simply nodded politely and continued entering data, accustomed to being treated as invisible furniture in a facility where split-second decisions could affect global security. Her supervisor, Major Patricia Williams, approached with another armload of documents requiring processing. "Martinez, I need these personnel transfers completed by noon, and there's a backlog of security clearance renewals that need updating in the system," Williams said, barely making eye contact. "Also, the coffee machine in Building C is acting up again. Can you handle that too?" Sarah accepted the additional tasks without complaint, though she couldn't help noticing that Major Williams had just assigned her work that traditionally belonged to 3 different departments. In the military hierarchy of NORAD, administrative clerks existed to handle whatever tasks no one else wanted to claim responsibility for. Sarah had learned to excel at being indispensable while remaining invisible, a skill that would prove more valuable than anyone realized. The truth about Sarah Martinez was far more complex than her colleagues understood. Growing up in Los Alamos, New Mexico, she had been surrounded by nuclear science from birth. Her father, Dr. Carlos Martinez, was a theoretical physicist who had worked on advanced reactor designs for the Department of Energy. Her mother, Dr. Elena Martinez, specialized in nuclear safety protocols and had consulted on emergency response procedures for facilities across the American Southwest. The Martinez household dinner conversations revolved around topics that most families never encountered: uranium enrichment processes, reactor core temperatures, electromagnetic pulse effects, and the intricate mathematics governing nuclear chain reactions. By age 12, Sarah could calculate critical mass equations in her head. By 16, she was helping her parents review technical papers on nuclear security systems. She had grown up understanding atomic energy not as an abstract concept, but as a precise science governed by immutable physical laws. Sarah's original plan had been to follow her parents' path into nuclear engineering. She had earned a full scholarship to MIT, where she excelled in advanced mathematics and nuclear physics. Her professors praised her intuitive understanding of complex systems and her ability to identify potential failure points that others missed. During her junior year, she had developed a theoretical framework for improving nuclear facility security protocols that earned recognition from the Department of Defense. But everything changed during the spring semester of her senior year. Sarah's younger brother, Lieutenant Michael Martinez, was stationed aboard the USS Connecticut, a nuclear submarine conducting routine patrols in the Pacific. Michael had always been the adventurous sibling, choosing military service over academic pursuits, but maintaining the family tradition of working with nuclear technology. The submarine's nuclear reactor provided the power that allowed it to remain submerged for months at a time, representing the cutting edge of naval nuclear engineering. The accident occurred during what should have been a routine maintenance procedure. A combination of human error and equipment malfunction led to a coolant leak in the submarine's nuclear propulsion system. While the reactor itself remained stable and no radiation was released into the environment, 3 crew members were exposed to dangerous levels of radioactive contamination. Michael was one of them. Sarah received the phone call while studying for her final exams. Her parents flew immediately to the Naval Medical Facility where Michael was receiving treatment for radiation poisoning. The doctors explained that while his condition wasn't immediately life-threatening, the long-term effects were uncertain. The exposure levels had been significant enough to potentially cause serious health complications later in life, and Michael's military career was effectively over. Watching her parents sit beside Michael's hospital bed, Sarah made a decision that would redirect her entire future. The nuclear industry that had defined her family's legacy had now claimed her brother's health and her parents' peace of mind. She couldn't bring herself to pursue a career that might one day require her to make decisions that could expose other families to similar risks. Instead of completing her nuclear engineering degree, Sarah transferred to business administration and applied for military service in a non-technical capacity. She specifically requested administrative roles that would keep her away from nuclear systems while still allowing her to serve her country. Her parents were confused by the decision, but they respected her choice to find her own path forward. What Sarah hadn't anticipated was how her extensive technical background would make her administrative work exceptionally effective. Her understanding of complex systems allowed her to organize information in ways that revealed patterns and inefficiencies invisible to others. Her mathematical training meant she could process large amounts of data quickly and accurately. Her familiarity with security protocols helped her identify potential problems before they became critical issues. At NORAD, Sarah's filing system had become legendary among the administrative staff. She had reorganized decades of documents using a classification method that took into account not just content, but cross-references, security levels, and operational relevance. Personnel reports that previously took hours to locate could now be found in minutes. Equipment inventories that had been scattered across multiple databases were consolidated into searchable formats that prevented costly duplicate orders. But Sarah's colleagues saw only the surface level of her work. To them, she was the quiet clerk who made their jobs easier by keeping everything organized. They didn't recognize the analytical mind that had transformed their chaotic record-keeping into a precision instrument. They couldn't see that every seemingly simple task Sarah completed involved complex problem-solving skills that would be invaluable in crisis situations. The irony wasn't lost on Sarah that she had spent 3 years trying to distance herself from nuclear technology, only to find herself working in a facility whose primary mission involved nuclear deterrence. NORAD's responsibilities included monitoring for incoming ballistic missiles, coordinating defensive responses, and maintaining communication with nuclear command authorities. The administrative paperwork Sarah processed daily dealt with the most powerful weapons ever created by humanity. During quiet moments at her desk, Sarah sometimes wondered if she had made the right choice. Her technical knowledge felt wasted on filing systems and inventory reports. Her parents still didn't fully understand why she had abandoned such a promising career in nuclear science. Her brother Michael, now medically retired and struggling with ongoing health issues, insisted that she shouldn't have sacrificed her dreams because of his accident. But Sarah had found unexpected satisfaction in her role as the person who kept everything running smoothly behind the scenes. She took pride in knowing that her organizational systems helped other personnel focus on their critical responsibilities without worrying about administrative details. She had created order from chaos, efficiency from confusion, and reliability from a system that had previously been held together by hope and good intentions. What Sarah didn't know was that her unique combination of nuclear technical knowledge and administrative precision had been noticed by people far above her pay grade. Her personnel file contained notes from security reviews that praised her exceptional analytical capabilities and comprehensive understanding of facility operations. Senior officers had begun to rely on her organizational systems without realizing they were trusting their mission effectiveness to the insights of someone they considered just a clerk. The morning that would change everything started like any other. Sarah arrived at her desk to find the usual stack of reports requiring processing, inventory updates needing verification, and scheduling conflicts. She poured herself coffee from the machine she had repaired the previous week and began working through her tasks with the methodical precision that had become her trademark. She had no way of knowing that 2,000 feet above her, in the upper levels of the facility, senior commanders were dealing with a developing crisis that would soon require every skill she had spent years trying to forget. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. At 08:47 hours, the first indication of trouble appeared on the massive display screens in NORAD's command center, 3 levels below Jan's administrative office. Senior Watch Officer Colonel Rebecca Thompson was reviewing routine morning reports when her communications specialist, Captain Mark Stevens, noticed an anomaly in the satellite tracking data. "Colonel, we're getting irregular signals from Navstar Satellite Cluster 7, Stevens reported, his voice carrying the controlled tension that marked experienced military personnel recognizing potential problems. The GPS constellation over the Pacific Northwest is showing intermittent blackouts. Colonel Thompson moved to Stevens' workstation, studying the data streams that painted a concerning picture across multiple monitors. The Global Positioning System satellites weren't just experiencing routine technical difficulties, they were being systematically jammed by what appeared to be sophisticated electronic warfare equipment operating from multiple locations. "How widespread is the interference?" Thompson asked, already reaching for the secure phone that would connect her to NORAD's senior command structure. "Growing by the minute, ma'am. We've lost clean signals from 12 satellites in the past 20 minutes. Whatever's causing this has serious capability, military-grade jamming equipment, probably mobile and coordinated across a broad geographic area." In the facility's main command center, a flurry of activity began as duty officers attempted to understand the scope of the developing situation. The GPS satellite constellation formed the backbone of America's navigation and timing systems, supporting everything from civilian air traffic control to military precision weapons guidance. Losing satellite coverage over strategic areas could blind critical defense systems at exactly the wrong moment. General Patricia Hayes, NORAD's commanding officer, entered the command center after being summoned from her morning briefing. Her 30 years of military experience had taught her to recognize patterns that suggested coordinated attacks rather than random equipment failures. "Colonel Thompson, what's our assessment?" Hayes asked, studying the tactical displays that showed expanding zones of communication disruption across the northwestern United States. "Ma'am, we're looking at systematic electronic warfare targeting our satellite constellation. The jamming patterns suggest multiple sources using advanced equipment. This isn't random interference or solar activity. Someone is deliberately degrading our space-based assets." General Hayes nodded grimly. GPS jamming had become a favorite tactic of hostile nations seeking to test American response capabilities without crossing the threshold into direct military confrontation. But the scope and sophistication of this attack suggested something more serious than routine probing of defensive systems. "Get me a direct line to the Pentagon and Space Command," Hayes ordered, "and I want a full technical analysis of the jamming signatures within the hour. If someone's testing our responses, they're about to learn we don't appreciate uninvited examinations of our capabilities." 3 floors below, Jean Martinez continued processing administrative paperwork, unaware that events were unfolding that would soon require every skill she had tried to leave behind. Her morning routine included reviewing security clearance renewals, updating personnel files, and ensuring that the endless stream of bureaucratic requirements were met on schedule. The work was methodical and predictable, exactly what she had chosen after deciding to avoid the high-stakes technical challenges that had defined her family's careers. Her computer chimed with an incoming message from Major Williams, requesting immediate processing of emergency personnel transfers. Jean opened the files and began reviewing the documentation, but something caught her attention. The transfer orders involved nuclear security specialists being reassigned from multiple facilities across the country, all with immediate effective dates and unusual authorization codes. Jean's technical background made her naturally curious about patterns in data, and these personnel movements didn't follow normal protocols. Nuclear security specialists typically remain at their assigned facilities for extended periods to maintain continuity and familiarity with specific systems. Sudden mass transfers suggested either a major training exercise or response to a developing threat. She pulled up additional databases to cross-reference the transfer orders with recent operational bulletins. What she found made her pause in her typing. The specialists being transferred all had expertise in electromagnetic pulse protection and hardened communication systems, exactly the kind of technical knowledge needed to respond to sophisticated electronic warfare attacks. At 0923 hours, the situation escalated dramatically. Captain Steven's voice carried across the command center with barely controlled urgency. "Colonel, we're detecting multiple missile launches from international waters, approximately 200 miles off the Pacific coast." Every person in the command center stopped what they were doing. Missile launches near American territorial waters represented the most serious possible threat short of direct attack. Colonel Thompson immediately activated the facility's highest alert status, while General Hayes established direct communication with Strategic Command and the Pentagon. "How many launches, and what's the trajectory analysis?" Hayes demanded, moving to the main tactical display that showed the western Pacific Ocean dotted with tracking symbols. "Initial count shows 6 launches, ma'am. Trajectory suggests they're not aimed at land targets, appears to be high-altitude detonation profiles." "Wait," Stevens paused, studying incoming data with growing alarm. "Ma'am, those missiles are carrying nuclear warheads, and they're positioned for electromagnetic pulse detonation over major population centers." The command center fell silent as the implications became clear. Electromagnetic pulse weapons detonated at high altitude could disable electronic systems across hundreds of thousands of square miles without directly killing anyone. But the secondary effects would be catastrophic: power grids failing, communication systems going dark, transportation networks collapsing, and emergency services becoming inoperable. "Time to impact?" General Hayes asked, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the threat. 12 minutes until the first warheads reach optimal detonation altitude, ma'am." General Hayes immediately activated NORAD's emergency protocols, establishing direct communication with the President's National Security Council and America's Nuclear Command Authority. The facility's blast doors sealed completely, isolating the mountain complex from the outside world while ensuring that critical defense functions could continue even under electromagnetic attack. But as senior officers focused on tracking the incoming threat and coordinating defensive responses, a more subtle but equally dangerous problem was developing within the facility itself. The electronic jamming that had begun with GPS satellites was expanding to target the hardened communication systems that connected NORAD to the outside world. Chief Warrant Officer Lisa Park, responsible for maintaining the facility's communication systems, began reporting systematic failures across multiple networks. "General, we're losing connectivity with Strategic Command. The jamming is targeting our hardened frequencies. Whoever's doing this has detailed knowledge of our communication protocols." Jean Martinez, still processing paperwork 3 floors below, began receiving automated error messages on her computer terminal. The transfer orders she had been reviewing were now showing authentication failures, as if the security systems validating the documents had been compromised. Her administrative database connections were becoming intermittent, and the facility's internal communication network was experiencing unexplained delays. But Jean's technical background allowed her to recognize what others might miss. The system failures weren't random. They followed patterns that suggested deliberate targeting of specific network protocols. Someone with intimate knowledge of NORAD's internal systems was conducting a sophisticated cyber attack designed to coincide with the electronic pulse threat. As the minutes counted down toward the missile detonations, Jean made a decision that would prove crucial. Instead of simply reporting the computer problems to the IT department, she began analyzing the attack patterns using her understanding of nuclear facility system security systems. Her parents' work on emergency response protocols had taught her to recognize the signatures of coordinated attacks designed to overwhelm defensive systems through multiple simultaneous threats. Jean opened her personal laptop, which operated on a separate network from the facility's main systems, and began mapping the cyber attack progression. What she discovered made her blood run cold. The attacks weren't just targeting communication systems, they were specifically designed to disable the nuclear command and control networks that would be needed to coordinate America's response to the electromagnetic pulse threat. 7 minutes until detonation, and the most secure facility in North America was losing its ability to communicate with the outside world. The jamming, the cyber attacks, and the missile launches weren't separate incidents. They were components of a carefully orchestrated plan to blind America's nuclear command structure at the moment when clear communication would be most critical. Jean stared at her analysis, realizing that she might be the only person in the facility who understood the full scope of what was happening. Her colleagues saw her as just an administrative clerk, but her unique combination of nuclear technical knowledge and access to the facility's information systems had given her insights that even senior officers lacked. The question was whether anyone would listen to the paper princess when she tried to explain that America was under attack in ways that went far beyond the obvious missile threat approaching from the Pacific Ocean. 5 minutes until detonation. Jean Martinez stared at her laptop screen, her hands trembling as the weight of her discovery settled over her. The coordinated attack wasn't just sophisticated, it was specifically designed by someone with intimate knowledge of NORAD's operational procedures. The timing of the cyber intrusions coincided exactly with shift changes when personnel would be focused on handover procedures rather than monitoring for subtle system anomalies. Jean's analysis revealed something even more disturbing. The cyber attacks weren't just disrupting communications, they were specifically targeting the nuclear command and control system protocols that would be essential for coordinating America's response to the EMP threat. If the electromagnetic pulse disabled civilian infrastructure while simultaneously blinding military command networks, the United States would be unable to mount any organized defensive response. She looked around her sterile administrative office, feeling the crushing isolation of being the only person who understood the full scope of the crisis developing above her head. Her colleagues continued their routine paperwork processing, unaware that their computer glitches were actually components of a national security catastrophe. The facility's blast doors had sealed, cutting them off from external communication, but the real threat was already inside their supposedly impenetrable defensive systems. Jean made a decision that violated every protocol she had learned in 3 years of military service. She abandoned her workstation and headed for the elevator that would take her to the command center levels where senior officers were coordinating responses to the missile threat. Her security clearance allowed access to most areas of the facility, but approaching senior command during a crisis without authorization could end her career, assuming anyone survived the next few minutes to process disciplinary action. The elevator ride to the command level felt endless. Jean used the time to organize her findings into a coherent presentation, knowing she would have seconds to convince skeptical senior officers that the quiet administrative clerk had identified threats they had missed. Her technical background gave her confidence in her analysis, but her administrative rank meant that most officers would be inclined to dismiss her observations as the nervous overreaction of someone outside the decision-making process. The command center doors required additional security authorization, but Jean's facility access codes still functioned, evidence that the cyber attacks hadn't yet penetrated the deepest security layers. She entered a scene of controlled chaos, with dozens of personnel tracking the incoming missile threat, coordinating with external agencies, and attempting to maintain communication links with the outside world. General Hayes stood at the central command console, receiving updates from multiple sources while making decisions that could affect millions of lives. The massive overhead displays showed the missile trajectories approaching their optimal detonation altitudes, while communication status boards revealed the growing extent of system failures across the facility's networks. "General Hayes," Jean called out, her voice carrying across the command center with an urgency that made several officers turn in her direction. "Ma'am, I need to report a coordinated cyber attack that's targeting our nuclear command protocols." Colonel Thompson intercepted Jean before she could approach the general directly. "Specialist Martinez, this is a restricted area during emergency operations. You need to return to your duty station immediately." "Colonel, with respect, I've identified attack patterns that indicate the missile threat is coordinated with cyber intrusions designed to disable our response capabilities," Jean said quickly, opening her laptop to display her analysis. "The timing isn't coincidental. Someone is using the EMP threat as cover for a much more sophisticated attack on our command structure." Colonel Thompson glanced at Jean's screen, her expression shifting from annoyance to concern as she recognized the technical complexity of the data. "General, we have Specialist Martinez here with analysis of the system failures we've been experiencing." General Hayes looked up from her tactical displays, her face showing the strain of coordinating responses to multiple simultaneous crises. "Specialist, you have 30 seconds to explain why an administrative clerk is interrupting crisis operations with computer analysis." Jean stepped forward, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. "Ma'am, the cyber attacks targeting our systems aren't random. They're specifically designed to disable nuclear command and control protocols at the exact moment when the EMP detonation would destroy civilian infrastructure. The attackers have detailed knowledge of our communication schedules, security protocols, and response procedures." She pointed to her laptop screen, which displayed a timeline showing the correlation between system failures and the approaching missile threat. "The jamming started with GPS satellites to mask the launch preparations. The cyber attacks began targeting our hardened networks to prevent coordination with strategic command. The EMP detonation will complete the isolation by destroying remaining communication infrastructure." General Hayes studied Jean's analysis, her experienced eye recognizing patterns that her combat-focused staff had missed while concentrating on the obvious missile threat. "Specialist, what's your assessment of our current capability to maintain nuclear command authority?" "Ma'am, we're losing connectivity with external command structures, but our internal systems are still partially functional. However, the cyber attacks are specifically targeting the authentication protocols for nuclear release authority. If we lose those connections in the next few minutes, we won't be able to coordinate any response even if we survive the EMP detonation." The implications were staggering. America's nuclear deterrent depended on maintaining clear command and control links between the President, Strategic Command, and operational forces. If those links were severed at the moment when the country came under attack, the military would be unable to respond effectively to any follow-up threats. "Colonel Thompson, what's our current status with the hardened communication systems?" General Hayes asked, her voice reflecting the growing urgency of the situation. "Ma'am, we've lost connectivity with Strategic Command and the Pentagon. Our backup systems are showing intermittent functionality, but we're experiencing authentication failures on secure channels. Chief Park estimates we have maybe 3 minutes before we lose all external communication capability." 2 minutes until detonation. Jean realized that her analysis had identified the problem, but solving it would require technical expertise that went far beyond her administrative training. The cyber attacks were sophisticated enough to suggest state-level resources and planning, but they were also specifically designed to exploit weaknesses in systems she understood better than anyone else in the facility. "General, I may be able to restore the nuclear command authentication protocols," Jean said, her voice barely above a whisper as she grasped the magnitude of what she was suggesting. "My background includes nuclear security system design, and I recognize the attack signatures. The intrusions are targeting specific vulnerabilities in the protocol architecture." General Hayes stared at Jean for a long moment, weighing the credibility of an administrative clerk against the desperate need for any solution to their communication crisis. "Specialist Martinez, explain your qualifications for nuclear system security work." "Ma'am, I have an MIT nuclear engineering background with specialization in security protocols. My parents are Dr. Carlos and Dr. Elena Martinez. They consulted on emergency response procedures for nuclear facilities nationwide. I understand these systems because I helped design theoretical improvements to them during my graduate research." The command center fell silent, except for the continuous updates from tracking stations monitoring the approaching missile threat. Jean's revelation changed everything. The quiet administrative clerk who had spent 3 years filing paperwork was actually one of the few people in the facility capable of understanding and potentially countering sophisticated attacks on nuclear command systems. 1 minute 30 seconds until detonation," Captain Stevens announced, his voice cutting through the tension like a countdown to catastrophe. General Hayes made the decision that would define the next phase of the crisis. "Specialist Martinez, you have authorization to attempt restoration of nuclear command protocols. Colonel Thompson, provide her with whatever technical support she requires. Chief Park, route all available system access to Martinez's workstation." Jean felt the weight of responsibility settling over her like a physical force. For 3 years, she had chosen administrative work to avoid making decisions that could affect other people's lives. Now she was being asked to prevent a catastrophe that could determine whether America retained the ability to defend itself against follow-up attacks. As she moved toward the technical workstation that would give her access to NORAD's most critical systems, Jean thought about her brother Michael, whose accident had led her to choose safety over challenge. But this wasn't about choosing between safety and danger. This was about using every skill she possessed to protect millions of people who would never know her name. The irony wasn't lost on her that after spending years trying to avoid nuclear technology, she was now racing against time to save the nuclear command system that formed the backbone of America's national defense. Sometimes, she realized, the most important moments choose you rather than the other way around. 1 minute until detonation. Jean's fingers flew across the keyboard as she accessed NORAD's nuclear command authentication systems, her MIT training and 3 years of administrative experience combining in ways she had never imagined. The technical workstation provided her with direct access to the most classified systems in the facility, protocols so sensitive that even most senior officers never saw them directly. Chief Warrant Officer Lisa Park positioned herself beside Jean, ready to provide technical support while monitoring the broader network status. "Martinez, the cyber attacks are adaptive. Every time we restore a connection, they shift tactics to target different vulnerabilities. Whatever you're planning, it needs to work on the first attempt." Jean's screen displayed the nuclear command network architecture, a complex web of encrypted communication pathways connecting NORAD to Strategic Command, the Pentagon, and ultimately to the President's nuclear authority. The cyber attacks had systematically targeted the authentication nodes that verified the legitimacy of nuclear release orders, creating gaps in the chain of command that could prevent any coordinated response to follow-up threats. "I can see the attack pattern," Jean said, her voice steady despite the countdown echoing through the command center. "They're exploiting a theoretical vulnerability in the dual-key authentication system, something that was identified in academic research but never publicly disclosed. This isn't just sophisticated, it's based on classified security analysis." General Hayes moved closer to Jean's workstation, studying the technical displays that showed the real-time status of America's nuclear command structure. "Specialist, what do you need to restore our connectivity?" "Ma'am, I need to implement a security patch that bypasses the compromised authentication nodes and establishes direct encrypted tunnels to Strategic Command. It's theoretically possible, but it requires manually reconfiguring the entire network architecture while under active attack. 30 seconds until detonation." Jean opened multiple command windows simultaneously, her understanding of nuclear security protocols allowing her to navigate systems that would have taken other technicians hours to comprehend. Her parents' work on emergency response procedures had included theoretical scenarios exactly like this: coordinated attacks designed to blind nuclear command networks during crisis situations. Park, I need you to isolate the primary authentication servers and route all traffic through the backup quantum encryption channels, Jean instructed, her administrative experience with the facility's systems proving invaluable for understanding which backup protocols were available. We're going to establish a hardened communication tunnel that bypasses every system they've compromised. Chief Park's hands moved across her own keyboard, following Jean's instructions while monitoring the network status displays. Martinez, the quantum channels haven't been tested under these conditions. We could lose everything if the encryption keys don't synchronize properly. 15 seconds until detonation, Captain Stevens announced, his voice cutting through the technical discussion like a blade. Jean's fingers paused over the keyboard as she prepared to execute the network reconfiguration that would either restore America's nuclear command capability or destroy it completely. The theoretical security patch she was implementing had never been tested in operational conditions, but her analysis of the cyber attacks showed that conventional countermeasures were insufficient against such sophisticated intrusions. 10 seconds, Stevens continued. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The command center fell silent as everyone waited for the electromagnetic pulse detonation that would mark the beginning of a new phase in the crisis. Jean continued typing, her concentration focused entirely on the lines of code that could determine whether America retained the ability to defend itself against whatever threats might follow. The silence stretched for several seconds before Captain Stevens spoke again, his voice filled with confusion. "Ma'am, we're not detecting any detonation signatures. The missiles appear to have malfunctioned." General Hayes looked up from Jean's workstation, her expression reflecting the bewilderment that was spreading throughout the command center. "Explain that, Captain. Nuclear warheads don't simply malfunction simultaneously." "Ma'am, all 6 missiles experienced what appears to be guidance system failures approximately 30 seconds before reaching optimal detonation altitude. They're falling harmlessly into the Pacific Ocean, well outside territorial waters." Jean's hands stopped moving as the implications of Stevens' report became clear. The missile threat had been a deception, sophisticated enough to trigger maximum response from American defense systems, but never intended to actually detonate overpopulated areas. The real attack had been the cyber intrusions that were designed to exploit the chaos and confusion of responding to an apparent nuclear threat. "General," Jean said quietly, "the missiles were never the primary weapon. They were a distraction designed to focus our attention on external threats while the real attack targeted our internal systems. Whoever planned this wanted to test our nuclear command structure's vulnerability to coordinated cyber warfare." General Hayes studied the tactical displays that showed the harmless missile trajectories ending in ocean splashdown zones far from any strategic targets. "Specialist Martinez, continue with your network restoration. If this was a test of our capabilities, I want to ensure we pass it." Jean resumed her work on the quantum encryption channels, but her understanding of the situation had fundamentally changed. The attackers hadn't been trying to disable America's nuclear deterrent permanently. They had been probing for weaknesses in the command structure that could be exploited during a real crisis. The sophisticated nature of the cyber attacks suggested state-level resources, but the restraint shown in the missile deception indicated someone who wanted to test American responses without triggering actual retaliation. "Park, the quantum channels are synchronizing properly," Jean reported, as her network reconfiguration began establishing secure connections. The large displays in the command center began showing restored connectivity as Jean's security patch successfully countered the cyber attacks. Green status indicators replaced the red warning symbols that had dominated the screens during the crisis, and communication links with external command authorities were re-established within minutes. But Jean's analysis of the attack patterns revealed something that made her blood run cold. The cyber intrusions hadn't been random probing of security vulnerability. They had been specifically designed to map NORAD's nuclear command architecture in detail. The attackers had gained comprehensive knowledge of communication protocols, authentication procedures, and backup systems that would be invaluable for planning future attacks. "General, we have a problem beyond the immediate crisis," Jean said, turning away from her workstation to face the senior command staff. The cyber attacks weren't just testing our defenses, they were mapping our entire nuclear command structure. The attackers now have detailed information about our communication protocols, security procedures, and backup systems. Colonel Thompson moved closer to study Jean's analysis. "Martinez, what's your assessment of the intelligence compromise?" "Ma'am, it's comprehensive. They know how we communicate with Strategic Command, how we authenticate nuclear release orders, and how our backup systems function." General Hayes absorbed this assessment while considering the broader implications for national security. An enemy with detailed knowledge of America's nuclear command vulnerabilities could potentially blind the entire deterrence system at the moment when it would be most needed. The test attack had been successful, not because it had caused permanent damage, but because it had provided invaluable intelligence for future operations. "Specialist Martinez," General Hayes said formally, "your analysis and technical response have been exceptional under extraordinary circumstances. However, I need you to understand that this incident is now classified at the highest levels. Your role in restoring nuclear command capability will not appear in standard reports." Jean nodded, understanding the political complexities that surrounded nuclear command issues. Her success in countering the cyber attacks had prevented a potentially catastrophic failure of America's defense capabilities. But acknowledging that such vulnerabilities existed would create international complications that went far beyond military considerations. "Ma'am, I understand the classification requirements," Jean replied, "but I recommend immediate implementation of enhanced security protocols for all nuclear command systems. The attackers will likely attempt more sophisticated intrusions based on the intelligence they gathered today." As the immediate crisis subsided and normal operations began resuming throughout the facility, Jean realized that her role at NORAD had fundamentally changed. She was no longer just an administrative clerk who happened to have technical knowledge. She had become someone whose unique combination of skills was essential for defending against evolving threats to national security. The Paper Princess had proven that sometimes the most critical battles are fought not with weapons, but with keyboards and code and the courage to act when everything depends on getting it right the first time. 3 days after the crisis, Jean Martinez sat in a conference room she had never seen before, located in a section of NORAD that didn't appear on any facility maps accessible to administrative personnel. The room was lined with screens displaying intelligence reports from agencies whose acronyms she recognized, but whose operations remained classified far above her security clearance level. Across the polished table sat General Hayes, Colonel Thompson, and 2 individuals who had introduced themselves only as Mr. Johnson and Dr. Walsh from the Department of Defense's Nuclear Security Assessment Division. The formal nature of the meeting made it clear that Jean's role in resolving the cyber attack had attracted attention from the highest levels of national security leadership. "Specialist Martinez," General Hayes began, "your analysis of the cyber intrusion has been reviewed by our intelligence partners, and your conclusions about the intelligence gathering objectives have been confirmed through additional classified sources. We're here to discuss your future role in addressing these vulnerabilities." Dr. Walsh, a woman in her 50s whose technical credentials were apparently impressive enough to warrant inclusion in such high-level discussions, leaned forward with a tablet displaying Jean's network restoration procedures. "Your implementation of the quantum encryption bypass was theoretically sound and operationally successful, but it also revealed gaps in our security architecture that we hadn't previously identified. The attacker's sophisticated knowledge of our systems suggests insider information or long-term penetration of our development processes." Jean felt the weight of responsibility settling over her again. But this time, it wasn't the immediate pressure of preventing catastrophe. It was the longer-term burden of understanding threats that most people couldn't even imagine. Dr. Walsh, my analysis suggests the attackers had access to classified security research that's never been publicly disclosed. The vulnerabilities they exploited were identified in theoretical studies conducted by academic institutions under defense contracts. Mr. Johnson, whose government credentials suggested intelligence community background, opened a folder containing documents that Jean wasn't supposed to see. Specialist Martinez, we've identified the source of the leaked security research. A foreign intelligence service has been systematically recruiting graduate students and academic researchers working on nuclear security projects. Your former MIT colleagues were specifically targeted because of their access to theoretical vulnerability assessments. The revelation hit Jean like a physical blow. Her graduate research on nuclear security protocols, work she had considered purely academic, had apparently been part of a broader intelligence operation designed to identify weaknesses in America's nuclear command structure. The attackers hadn't just randomly discovered sophisticated exploitation techniques. They had been systematically studying American nuclear security research for years. How extensive is the compromise? Jean asked, her voice barely above a whisper as she contemplated the implications for national security. Colonel Thompson consulted a classified briefing document before responding. Martinez, we believe the foreign intelligence operation has gathered comprehensive information about nuclear security vulnerabilities across multiple facilities and command systems. Your former research advisor, Professor David Chen, has been identified as an unwitting source of classified information through his graduate student recruitment program. Jean's mind raced as she processed the connections. Professor Chen had supervised her graduate thesis on nuclear command authentication protocols, work that had earned recognition from the Department of Defense for its insights into potential security improvements. If foreign intelligence services had been recruiting his graduate students, they would have gained access to theoretical research that revealed the exact vulnerabilities exploited during the NORAD attack. General Hayes said slowly, if they have comprehensive intelligence about our nuclear security vulnerabilities, the test attack on NORAD was probably just the beginning. They're likely planning more sophisticated operations against other facilities using the knowledge they've gathered to disable our nuclear deterrent during a real crisis. Dr. Walsh nodded grimly. That's our assessment as well. We're facing a coordinated, long-term intelligence operation designed to neutralize America's nuclear command capability through cyber warfare rather than direct military confrontation. The sophistication and patience required for such an operation suggest state-level resources and planning. Mr. Johnson placed additional documents on the table, their classification markings indicating information that could affect national security if disclosed. Specialist Martinez, we're prepared to offer you a position with the Nuclear Security Assessment Division, where your unique combination of technical knowledge and operational experience would be invaluable for developing countermeasures against these threats.
Jean stared at the documents, understanding that accepting such a position would fundamentally change her life in ways that went far beyond career advancement. She would be leaving behind the relative safety of administrative work to become directly involved in protecting America's nuclear deterrent against sophisticated and determined adversaries. What would my responsibilities involve? Jean asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. General Hayes responded with the directness that characterized senior military leadership. Martinez, you would be responsible for identifying and countering cyber threats against nuclear command systems nationwide. Your work would involve traveling to classified facilities, analyzing security vulnerabilities, and developing defensive protocols against attacks similar to what we experienced here. It's dangerous work with high stakes and little recognition. Jean thought about her brother Michael, whose submarine accident had led her to choose administrative work over technical challenges. She thought about her parents, who had devoted their careers to nuclear security research without fully understanding how that knowledge might be exploited by foreign adversaries. Most importantly, she thought about the millions of Americans who depended on nuclear deterrence for their security, most of whom would never know when that deterrence was under attack. There's something else you need to understand, Dr. Walsh continued. The foreign intelligence operation targeting nuclear security research is ongoing. Your former colleagues at MIT and other institutions are still being recruited and exploited for information. Part of your role would involve working undercover to identify and counter these recruitment efforts. The complexity of what was being proposed became clear to Jean. She wouldn't just be developing technical countermeasures against cyber attacks, she would be working to protect the academic research community that had unknowingly become a target for foreign intelligence services. Her understanding of both nuclear security systems and academic research environments made her uniquely qualified for such work. "General, I need to ask about my brother Michael," Jean said carefully. "His medical situation requires ongoing support, and my parents are still dealing with the emotional aftermath of his accident. If I accept this position, how would that affect my ability to maintain family responsibilities?" Colonel Thompson consulted another document before responding. "Martinez, the position includes comprehensive family support services, including advanced medical care for your brother and security protection for your parents. Given the sensitive nature of your work, ensuring your family's well-being becomes a national security priority." Jean realized that accepting the position would mean her entire family would become part of the classified world she was being asked to enter. The government would provide resources and protection, but it would also mean living with the constant awareness that their security depended on her continued cooperation with highly classified operations. "I need time to consider this," Jean said, though she could see in the faces around the table that time was a luxury they couldn't afford. "How immediate is the threat timeline?" Mr. Johnson's response carried the weight of intelligence assessments that Jean wasn't cleared to see directly. "Martinez, we have indicators suggesting that follow-up attacks against nuclear facilities are being planned for implementation within the next 6 months. Your work at NORAD demonstrated that you have capabilities that could prevent such attacks, but only if we can get countermeasures in place quickly." The meeting concluded with Jean being given 24 hours to make a decision that would determine not just her career, but potentially the security of America's nuclear deterrence against evolving threats that most people couldn't comprehend. As she walked back to her administrative office, Jean realized that her 3 years of trying to avoid high-stakes technical challenges had only delayed the inevitable moment when her skills would be needed for purposes she had never anticipated. That evening, Jean called her parents for a conversation she had been dreading since the crisis at NORAD. She needed their advice about accepting a role that would honor their legacy while potentially putting the entire family at risk in ways that went far beyond anything they had experienced during their own government service. The paper princess was being asked to become something much more dangerous and much more important than she had ever imagined possible. That evening, Jean sat in her small apartment outside Colorado Springs, staring at her phone for 20 minutes before finally dialing her parents' number in Los Alamos. The classified briefing had left her with questions that only Dr. Carlos and Dr. Elena Martinez could help her answer, but explaining the situation would require revealing information that challenged the boundaries of what she was authorized to discuss. "Mija," her father answered on the second ring, his voice carrying the warmth that had sustained the Martinez family through Michael's accident and recovery. "How are things at the mountain? Your mother and I were just talking about how proud we are of your work there." Jean felt a familiar pang of guilt about how little her parents actually knew about her role at NORAD. For 3 years, she had described her work in vague terms that emphasized administrative responsibilities while downplaying the classified nature of the facility's operations. Now she was facing decisions that would make such concealment impossible. "Dad, I need to talk to you and Mom about something important. It's about my work and it's about the family's connection to nuclear security research." Dr. Carlos Martinez's tone shifted immediately, reflecting decades of experience with classified government projects. "Jean, hold on. Let me get your mother on the line, and then you need to be very careful about what you can and cannot discuss over unsecured communications." Within moments, Dr. Elena Martinez joined the conversation, her background in nuclear safety protocols making her immediately sensitive to Jean's careful phrasing. "Sweetheart, are you calling because something has happened at your facility that relates to our research work?" Jean took a deep breath, understanding that her parents' expertise would allow them to read between the lines of what she could legally say. "Mom, Dad, I've been offered a position that would involve traveling to nuclear facilities nationwide to assess security vulnerabilities. The work would be classified at levels that would affect our entire family, and I need your advice about whether to accept." The silence on the phone lasted several seconds as her parents processed the implications. Dr. Carlos spoke first, his voice reflecting the gravity he reserved for discussions of national security. "Jean, are you telling us that recent events have revealed vulnerabilities in nuclear command systems that require your specific expertise to address?" "Yes, Dad. My background in nuclear security research, combined with my operational experience at this facility, apparently makes me qualified for work that would be essential for protecting nuclear deterrent capabilities nationwide." Dr. Elena's response carried the mixture of pride and concern that had characterized her approach to nuclear safety throughout her career. "Mija, if you're being asked to do this work, it means the threats are significant enough to justify involving someone with your combination of technical knowledge and security clearance, but it also means you would be placing yourself in situations that could be extremely dangerous." Jean explained what she could about the foreign intelligence operation targeting nuclear security research, being careful to avoid specifics that were classified above what her parents were clear to know. But she was able to convey the essential reality. Their decades of nuclear research had been systematically exploited by foreign adversaries who were using that knowledge to threaten American nuclear command capabilities. "Jean," Dr. Carlos said slowly, "your mother and I have spent our entire careers working to improve nuclear security, but we never fully understood how our research might be weaponized against the systems we were trying to protect. If our work has contributed to vulnerabilities that threaten national security, then we have a responsibility to help correct those vulnerabilities." The conversation was interrupted by a call from Michael, who had been listening to their discussion from his apartment in Albuquerque, where he was continuing his recovery and rehabilitation. The three-way call that followed would prove to be one of the most important conversations in the Martinez family's history. "Jean, I need to tell you something I've never said before," Michael began, his voice carrying the weight of 3 years of reflection on his submarine accident. "When I was in the hospital after the radiation exposure, I was angry that you changed your career plans because of what happened to me. I felt guilty that my accident had derailed your dreams of following Dad's path in nuclear engineering." Jean started to respond, but Michael continued. "But now I understand that you didn't abandon your path. You found a different way to serve that's potentially more important than anything I could have accomplished in my submarine career. You've proven that you can use your technical knowledge to protect people in ways that go beyond traditional military service." Dr. Elena's voice reflected the maternal concern that had driven many of her family decisions since Michael's accident. "But Jean, accepting this position would mean living with constant security risks and being separated from family for extended periods. After what we went through with Michael's situation, I'm not sure I can handle worrying about another child being in danger." Jean understood her mother's fears, but she also recognized that the Martinez family's long tradition of public service was being tested in ways that required difficult choices. "Mom, the position includes comprehensive security protection for the entire family, and the work I would be doing could prevent other families from experiencing tragedies like Michael's accident. The nuclear systems I would be protecting aren't just military assets, they're the foundation of the deterrent that keeps nuclear weapons from being used." Dr. Carlos's response reflected his lifetime of experience with the weight of nuclear responsibility. "Elena, throughout our careers, we've always known that nuclear technology carries the burden of enormous potential for both good and harm. If Jean has the opportunity to use her knowledge to protect nuclear systems from being compromised by foreign adversaries, then supporting her decision becomes our responsibility as well." The family discussion continued for over an hour, covering topics that ranged from practical security considerations to philosophical questions about duty, sacrifice, and legacy. Jean learned that her parents had always hoped she would find a way to contribute to nuclear security, despite her decision to avoid direct technical work. Michael revealed that he had been considering returning to government service in a consulting capacity, using his submarine experience to help improve nuclear safety protocols. Most importantly, Jean discovered that her family's support for her accepting the classified position was unanimous, despite their concerns about the personal risks involved. Her parents understood that their research background had inadvertently contributed to the vulnerabilities she was being asked to address. Michael recognized that her work could prevent other military personnel from experiencing accidents caused by inadequate security measures. "Jean," Dr. Elena said as the conversation neared its conclusion, "your father and I have decided that if you accept this position, we want to apply for security clearances that would allow us to provide technical support for your work. Our knowledge of nuclear security research could be valuable for understanding how our academic work has been compromised and how to prevent future exploitation." The offer surprised Jean, but it also provided a solution to one of her primary concerns about accepting the classified position. Having her parents directly involved in the work would mean that the family's nuclear expertise could be focused on protecting American security rather than inadvertently undermining it. "And Jean," Michael added, "I want to apply for a position with the Veterans Administration's Nuclear Safety Consulting Program. My submarine experience, combined with my understanding of radiation exposure risks, could be valuable for improving safety protocols at nuclear facilities nationwide. If our family is going to be involved in this work, we should all contribute whatever expertise we have." As the call ended, Jean realized that her decision about accepting the classified position had evolved into a family commitment to redirecting their collective nuclear expertise toward protecting American security. The Martinez family's legacy in nuclear research would continue, but with a focus on counterintelligence and security rather than purely academic or technological advancement. The next morning, Jean walked into the classified conference room at NORAD with her decision made and a proposal that would surprise the government officials who had recruited her. She was ready to accept the position with the Nuclear Security Assessment Division, but she wanted to bring her family's expertise along with her own. Jean entered the classified conference room at precisely 0800 hours, carrying a proposal that would fundamentally change how the government approached nuclear security threats. General Hayes, Dr. Walsh, and Mr. Johnson were already seated, along with two new faces, Admiral Susan Roberts from Strategic Command and Director James Patterson from the Department of Energy's Nuclear Security Division. "Specialist Martinez," General Hayes began, "I trust you've had time to consider our offer." "Yes, ma'am. I accept the position with the Nuclear Security Assessment Division, but I have a proposal that could significantly enhance our capabilities against the foreign intelligence operation we've identified." Jean placed a detailed briefing document on the table, her administrative experience with classified paperwork ensuring that every page was properly marked with appropriate security classifications. "My family represents 3 generations of nuclear expertise that has been inadvertently exploited by foreign adversaries. I propose establishing a Martinez Family Nuclear Security Task Force that would combine academic research experience, operational knowledge, and field expertise to address these threats comprehensively." Admiral Roberts leaned forward, studying Jean's proposal with the attention to detail that characterized senior naval officers. "Martinez, explain how your family's involvement would provide operational advantages beyond your individual capabilities." Jean activated a presentation she had prepared using her understanding of both nuclear systems and intelligence briefing protocols. "Admiral, my parents have 40 years of combined experience in nuclear security research and emergency response protocols. They understand the theoretical foundations that foreign intelligence services have been exploiting. My brother Michael has practical experience with nuclear submarine operations and radiation safety procedures that would be valuable for assessing vulnerabilities in military nuclear systems. Director Patterson, whose Energy Department background made him acutely aware of the scope of nuclear security challenges, asked the question Jean had been expecting. Martinez, your proposal essentially involves turning your entire family into a classified intelligence operation. What assurances can you provide about security and operational effectiveness? Sir, the Martinez family has held security clearances for decades, and our understanding of nuclear systems has already been compromised by foreign intelligence services. Rather than trying to protect knowledge that has already been stolen, we propose using our expertise to develop countermeasures that exploit the attacker's reliance on that stolen information. Dr. Walsh consulted her tablet, which displayed security assessments and personnel evaluations that Jean couldn't see directly. Martinez, your parents' research was specifically targeted for foreign intelligence collection. How do you propose protecting their ongoing work from further exploitation? Jean had anticipated this concern and had developed a response based on her understanding of both nuclear security and counterintelligence operations. Dr. Walsh, we propose establishing a controlled information environment where my parents' research work becomes part of an active counterintelligence operation. By providing them with false information about nuclear security vulnerabilities, we could potentially mislead foreign intelligence services while developing genuine countermeasures using their real expertise. The room fell silent as the senior officials processed the implications of Jean's proposal. She was suggesting something far more sophisticated than simply hiring her family members for classified work. She was proposing a complex deception operation that would use their compromised research background as an asset rather than a liability. Mr. Johnson spoke first, his intelligence community experience making him naturally skeptical of operations that involved civilian academics. Martinez, what you're proposing would require coordination between multiple agencies, extensive security oversight, and careful management of information flows. The alternative is continuing to react to attacks based on intelligence that foreign adversaries have already gathered about our systems. My proposal would allow us to take proactive measures while potentially feeding false information to the intelligence networks that have been targeting nuclear security research. General Hayes studied Jean's briefing materials while considering the broader strategic implications. Martinez, assuming we approve your family task force concept, what would be your first priority for addressing the immediate threats we've identified? Jean had prepared for this question by analyzing the intelligence briefing she had been shown during previous meetings. Ma'am, I recommend beginning with a comprehensive security assessment of the nuclear command facilities that were identified as potential targets for follow-up attacks. My understanding of both the technical vulnerabilities and the foreign intelligence operation would allow us to prioritize defensive measures most effectively.
Admiral Roberts consulted a classified document before responding. Martinez, Strategic Command has identified 6 facilities that show indicators of potential targeting by the foreign intelligence operation. These facilities represent critical nodes in our nuclear command structure, and compromise of any one of them could significantly degrade our deterrent capabilities. The briefing that followed provided Jean with her first comprehensive understanding of the scope of threats facing American nuclear security. The foreign intelligence operation wasn't just targeting individual facilities. It was systematically mapping the entire nuclear command structure with the apparent goal of identifying points where coordinated attacks could disable the entire system simultaneously. Director Patterson, Jean said after reviewing the threat assessment, the pattern suggests they're planning a coordinated attack designed to coincide with a major international crisis. The goal wouldn't be permanent destruction of our nuclear capabilities, but temporary disruption at a moment when nuclear deterrence would be most critical for preventing escalation. Dr. Walsh nodded approvingly. That's consistent with our intelligence assessments. The sophistication and patience required for this operation suggests strategic planning for a specific future scenario where American nuclear command would need to be neutralized temporarily. The meeting continued for 2 hours, covering operational details, security protocols, and timeline considerations for implementing Jean's proposed task force. By the conclusion, Jean had been formally appointed as director of the Martinez Family Nuclear Security Task Force, with authority to recruit her parents and brother for classified work under carefully controlled conditions. But the final briefing element surprised Jean in ways she hadn't anticipated. General Hayes presented her with a document that carried classification markings she had never seen before. Markings that indicated information so sensitive that it was restricted to fewer than 50 people in the entire government. Martinez,
There's one additional factor you need to understand before beginning your new responsibilities, General Hayes said, her voice carrying the weight of information that could affect global stability. The foreign intelligence operation targeting nuclear security research isn't being conducted by a traditional adversary nation. Our analysis suggests it's being coordinated by a coalition of countries that have concluded American nuclear deterrence represents an obstacle to their long-term strategic objectives. The implications were staggering. Jean had assumed she was dealing with a sophisticated but conventional intelligence operation conducted by a single hostile nation. Instead, she was facing a coordinated international effort involving multiple countries working together to neutralize American nuclear capabilities through cyber warfare and intelligence collection. "Ma'am, how many countries are involved in this coalition?" Jean asked, though she suspected the answer would be classified beyond her current clearance level. Admiral Roberts provided a carefully measured response. "Martinez, at least 4 nations with significant cyber warfare capabilities are coordinating their intelligence collection efforts against our nuclear systems. They're sharing information, coordinating attack timing, and developing joint operational plans that go far beyond what any single country could accomplish independently." As Jean left the classified conference room with her new security credentials and operational authority, she realized that her role had expanded beyond anything she had imagined when she first picked up a rifle on a mountain 3 years ago. She was no longer just protecting a single facility or responding to individual crises. She was being asked to lead a family-based counterintelligence operation against a coordinated international threat to American nuclear deterrence. The Paper Princess had become the director of one of the most sensitive security operations in American history, with the responsibility for protecting nuclear capabilities that formed the foundation of global stability. And she would be doing it with her family at her side, using expertise that had been exploited by enemies but could now be redirected toward protecting the country they had all sworn to serve. 6 months later, Jean Martinez stood in the Secure Communications Center at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, watching her parents work alongside her brother on the most sophisticated counterintelligence operation in American history. The Martinez Family Nuclear Security Task Force had exceeded every expectation, successfully identifying and neutralizing 3 attempted cyber attacks while feeding false intelligence to the international coalition that had targeted American nuclear capabilities. Dr. Carlos Martinez worked at a specialized workstation developing theoretical security improvements that appeared genuine enough to attract foreign intelligence attention, while actually containing subtle flaws that would cause any attack based on them to fail spectacularly. His 4 decades of nuclear research experience allowed him to create convincing false documentation that would mislead adversaries while protecting real security protocols. Across the room, Dr. Elena Martinez collaborated with Energy Department specialists to implement authentic security enhancements at facilities that had been identified as potential targets. Her expertise in emergency response procedures had proven invaluable for developing rapid reaction protocols that could counter sophisticated cyber attacks within minutes of detection. Michael Martinez, now serving as a technical consultant for nuclear safety protocols, had used his submarine experience to identify vulnerabilities in military nuclear systems that academic research had never addressed. His understanding of radiation safety procedures had led to improvements in emergency response capabilities at 6 critical facilities across the country. But Jean's role had evolved far beyond what anyone had anticipated when she first proposed the family task force. As Director of Nuclear Security Assessment, she had become the central coordination point for counterintelligence operations involving over 40 research institutions and 12 government agencies. Her unique combination of technical expertise, operational experience, and administrative skills had made her indispensable for managing the complex information flows required to deceive sophisticated foreign intelligence operations.
"Jean," Dr. Walsh called from her monitoring station, "we're getting indicators that the international coalition is planning to test their capabilities against the false vulnerabilities your father has been developing. This could be our opportunity to trace their operational networks back to their source." Jean moved to the Central Command Console, where displays showed the status of monitoring operations across multiple continents. The Martinez task force had not only prevented attacks against American nuclear facilities, they had turned the foreign intelligence operation into a source of information about the adversary's capabilities, plans, and organizational structure. Dr. Walsh, what's the timeline for their planned test operation? Jean asked, studying the intelligence indicators that suggested coordinated activity across the coalition's network. Based on communication intercepts and operational preparation indicators, we estimate they're planning a comprehensive test of their attack capabilities within the next 72 hours. They've been convinced by your father's false research that they've identified a critical vulnerability in our nuclear command authentication systems. The irony wasn't lost on Jean that her family's expertise was now being used to protect the same nuclear deterrence systems that had initially driven her away from technical work. But the international coalition's sophisticated approach to neutralizing American nuclear capabilities had required equally sophisticated countermeasures that went far beyond traditional military responses. General Hayes entered the communications center carrying briefing materials that indicated developments at the highest levels of government. Martinez, your task force's intelligence on the international coalition has been briefed to the National Security Council. The President wants to understand our capabilities for addressing this threat proactively rather than continuing to respond defensively. Jean had been expecting this moment since the task force's establishment. The success of their counterintelligence operations had inevitably attracted attention from senior leadership who wanted to expand their capabilities beyond protection into active measures against the adversary coalition. General, my assessment is that we now have sufficient intelligence about the coalition's operational methods to disrupt their entire network structure. But doing so would require coordinated actions that go beyond nuclear security into broader foreign policy considerations. Admiral Roberts joined the discussion via secure video link from Strategic Command Headquarters. Martinez, explain your recommendations for neutralizing the coalition's capabilities without escalating to direct military confrontation. Jean activated a presentation that represented 6 months of analysis by the Martinez task force and supporting intelligence agencies. Admiral, we propose implementing a coordinated information operation that would cause the coalition members to question each other's reliability while simultaneously feeding them false information about American nuclear capabilities that would render their attack plans ineffective. The proposed operation was breathtaking in its scope and sophistication. Rather than simply defending against the coalition's attacks, Jean's team had developed a comprehensive plan to turn their intelligence collection efforts against them, while creating distrust among coalition members that would ultimately cause the entire operation to collapse from within. The key insight, Jean continued, is that the coalition's strength comes from coordinated information sharing among member nations. If we can disrupt that coordination while making each member believe the others are providing false information, their entire operational framework becomes counterproductive. Director Patterson studied Jean's analysis with the attention of someone whose agency would be responsible for implementing much of the proposed operation. Martinez, what you're proposing would essentially weaponize the nuclear security research community against foreign intelligence collection. Are you confident that academic institutions can maintain operational security for such complex deception operations? Jean's response reflected 6 months of experience managing exactly such operations. Sir, the academic researchers involved in our current operations understand that their previous work was exploited by foreign adversaries. They're highly motivated to participate in countermeasures that protect both their research integrity and national security. The discussion continued for several hours, covering operational details that would determine how the United States responded to the most sophisticated threat ever mounted against its nuclear deterrent capabilities. Jean found herself briefing senior officials on strategies that combined her family's nuclear expertise with counterintelligence methods that had never been attempted at such scale. But the personal moment that defined Jean's transformation came when General Hayes presented her with promotion orders that she had never expected. Lieutenant Martinez, the general said formally, your leadership of the Nuclear Security Assessment Task Force has earned you a direct commission and assignment as the Department of Defense's senior advisor for nuclear counterintelligence operations. Jean stared at the promotion documents, understanding that her journey from administrative clerk to senior defense official represented something larger than individual career advancement. The threats facing American nuclear security had required new approaches that combined technical expertise, operational experience, and family dedication in ways that traditional military structure couldn't accommodate. Admiral Roberts smiled for the first time during the briefing. Lieutenant Martinez, the task force concept has been so successful that we're implementing similar family-based operations for other critical security challenges. Your parents and brother will be receiving promotions and expanded authority that reflect their contributions to national security. As the briefing concluded and Jean prepared to implement the comprehensive operation against the international coalition, she reflected on the path that had brought her from filing paperwork in administrative offices to directing some of the most sensitive operations in American history. Her decision to avoid nuclear technology after Michael's accident had ultimately led her to a role where she could protect nuclear systems more effectively than she ever could have as a traditional engineer or technician.
The Martinez family's legacy in nuclear security would continue, but with a focus on protecting American capabilities against adversaries who had tried to exploit their expertise for hostile purposes. Jean had proven that sometimes the most important service comes from being exactly where you're needed when the country needs you most. 6 months later, news reports would mention the successful resolution of technical difficulties in international nuclear security cooperation without ever revealing that a family of nuclear experts had prevented a coordinated attack on American deterrent capabilities. The Paper Princess had become the guardian of nuclear secrets, ensuring that the weapons designed to prevent wars would never be compromised by those who sought to make wars more likely. Jean Martinez had found her calling not in spite of her family's nuclear legacy, but because of it. And America was safer because someone who had never intended to become a guardian of nuclear secrets had accepted that responsibility when no one else could. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.